Welcome, everybody, to The Exchange with me, Tom Lenfestey. This is our inaugural episode, our first episode. So very excited to be here, launch this in a world of changing marketplace for buying and selling law firms. So our goal is to hopefully bring you information, excitement, energy, insight, expert speakers, friends, interesting topics, and just, share. Hopefully share things that will help you, whether you're planning for sale or purchase, or you're just looking to improve the overall value or operations of your firm. Today's episode, right, is the great law firm exit. How to sell your firm without losing your legacy. And overall, kind of this core premise that we're working on in this episode is you don't have to choose really between money and meaning, right? Like personal purpose or whatever else. If you plan correctly, you can truly have both. And it's one of those things, like if you're a law firm owner and whatnot, you're sitting in the seat, like that is that piece where you maybe want sale, you want succession, you want a plan, but really it's hard, right? Because there's this purpose. I'm a lawyer. So we're going to talk about that in a couple different ways. So overall, to get started, let's just roll into it with a story. Alone in your office. It's 7:30 at night, right? Lights are off in the rest of the building. Your name's still on the door. But for the first time, you're really sitting there and you're just not sure how much longer. It's really one of those things that you've put in decades of work to get there. We have lawyers that have worked 30, 40, 50 years plus to build their law practice, to build their law firm. And so for this attorney, they're sitting there, again, doing this kind of traditional. We work as lawyers, right? That's what we do. The pride of the billable hour, the pride of working 6 days or 7 days. And we care for our clients. So we take care of them, everything else. But as this lawyer is sitting there at 7:30 at night, he's thinking about those decades of work to build not just his own practice, but this firm, right? The clients who have trusted him now and over the years, the staff who have built their careers there. And really that overall aspect of just, the team. Like he's had staff come and go, but overall his team, he loves some of his team. Some of them have been there for 20 years, 30 years with them. And now the question is, how do you turn that decades of work into financial security without destroying the very thing that he's worked so hard to do, his legacy? Right? That's what his firm and this firm is. It's truly the legacy. And so overall, the goal or whatnot is to preserve that. But the myth is selling is abandoning ship, right? If he's sitting there at his desk, he's like, well, if I sell, I'm giving up something. I'm leaving, I'm departing, I'm abandoning ship. When in reality, selling is really, it can be the most responsible leadership decision that he's ever going to make in his law firm career. So the goal is don't let that myth of like selling is losing everything else be something to stop you from doing it, right? And the reality is whether you're 70 some years old or you're 30 some years old and you're practicing law and you're a law firm owner or anything else, you could be in that seat sooner than you think. So excited to be here and kind of share how we take this scenario and make it into a win. Overall, for those that don't know, my name is Tom Lenfestey. By degree, I'm an attorney and CPA. I was in private practice for years, helping in estate planning, corporate, and tax with a lot of professional business owners. That's kind of what my niche in private practice had built into. And overall, helping these dentists, CPAs, other professionals, a lot of times with their own succession plans. And I tell everybody, I got jealous. I got jealous that they seemed to figure out how to build up a professional business, get it to a certain point where then they could exit and retire by hiring a broker to help them find a young dentist to come in, or affiliating with a new CPA firm that was going to take on and transition clients, having a doctor affiliate with hospitals, and kind of all the changing things. And so I had the idea as an entrepreneurial, not young, but younger attorney to essentially say, how do we help lawyers, or who, the first question is helping lawyers do this? And the answer back in 2012, when I started that exploration, was really no one. And so the goal was to build something to first help lawyers really establish and kind of develop what is the path that they can take to complete a legacy preservation, to continue the law firm that they built by passing the baton to somebody else. And we did that through consulting, education, right, advising, and some brokerage deals. Well, today, the Law Practice Exchange is in a position where we run a marketplace for buying and selling law firms, a self-help kind of search, match, connect, find your successor, find your buying opportunity in the marketplace. And that's housed at the marketplace.law. I think we have 1,500 buyers and sellers in there looking for the perfect match, which is great. It was a huge investment to build a marketplace for buying and selling law firms. So super excited that we've launched that. And then we have our LP advisory, which helps private market larger firms find their right buyer, their investment partner, their transaction partner for succession, legacy growth, and working with private equity, MSOs, kind of the new regulation of who's coming into this space to really do so. And then in the advisory umbrella, we're helping on valuations, we're helping on deal structuring, we're helping on therapy for deals, or helping on completing how do you move from what your goals are to what that finish line is. And over the years, I can tell you, we've helped thousands of lawyers. We've preserved probably over 300 million in law firm revenues, and that's growing exponentially now as the market goes up. We have, I think, 500 plus comparable transactions of our own law firm data of what law firms sell for and are bought for. We have the deal structure knowledge, and we know what really works as far as the secret sauce to get deals done. So I'm happy to be here, hopefully to share that information, not just in myself, but in bringing others that I trust and those experts in the field. So there's just too many lawyers, right? And that's why this podcast exists. There's too many lawyers that wait too long, really wait too long to take those next steps. And there's too many exits from law firms that are either accidental, they're rushed, or they just destroy the value of what they built. I think you probably can name other lawyers or kind of know across town where they built something and then due to health, retirement, right, taking a different job, they just wind down their practice and go on. So they spend years building, and then wind it down and kind of exit. And today, law firms are having to make significant investments into technology, marketing, really people and systems and everything that comes with it. And so all part of this, right, is you're sinking more into your firm. You need to make sure you can still get the value out of your firm. Why is exiting so hard? Really, why is it so hard for lawyers? What we want to talk about is the inner struggle. If I'm a lawyer, I'm a law firm owner, why lawyers get stuck. And really, it's all about the emotional reality of exiting. We get to a point where law firms are just a little bit different, right? Especially your traditional law firms, those that are in the marketplace right now. Overall, it's not just a business. It's a personal reputation. It's my personal brand that's tied to the firm. There's ethical obligations. There's deep client and community and referral relationships as part of it. So when you contrast it to other businesses, like you can sell a car wash and walk away. Sure, there's some repeat customers you'll miss, everything else, but they're probably not going to stop coming to the car wash because you're not there. But you can't necessarily just throw the keys to somebody and walk away with a law firm. Even if the structure allows for it, probably your personal emotional attachment to it and to the profession doesn't allow you to do so. And so that really leads into like this identity problem. When your name is on the door, selling feels like it's erasing yourself, right? It feels like I'm going to sell is loss. So common thoughts are, who am I if I'm not a lawyer? Or will clients trust someone else? Am I betraying my staff, my team, right, if I do this? So you really get into this identity problem of, I want to, but I'm afraid to. I want to, but who will I be if I'm not the law firm owner of this firm? So when you really go through them, like, who am I if I'm not a lawyer? Well, nobody's telling you to stop being a lawyer. It's just about the ownership of your firm. You can still be a lawyer for the day until you are taken from the earth. Overall, you just may not want to be the owner of your firm. Maybe you want to stay on as of counsel right? For certain roles. Otherwise, maybe you want to do pro bono work. Maybe you want a mentor. There's so many things you can still do as a lawyer, right? If you want to be a lawyer. But maybe you don't own your firm, so you don't have that risk and you've been able to monetize the value of your firm. Will the clients trust someone else is always a big fear. Every law firm deal we do is based on finding the right fit between a seller and buyer and then developing a transition plan where you introduce. What I can tell you over almost 15 years of doing this is that the clients will trust who you pick as your successor, right? And they will appreciate that versus you leaving them to go find other counsel or leaving them in a lurch if health or other things come up. And then the question about betraying your staff or your team or otherwise, right? From that standpoint, buyers want your team. If you're going to leave after a transition, they really need and want your team because they're good and they've helped operate this firm, and there's usually a lot of value there. So know that these are fears, but also usually there's solutions. Because with that, right, once I give up control and I give the baton to somebody else that I've chosen. So I had control all the way through the sale or exit process. But once I get there, then overall, I've accomplished that. I've been able to care deeply for my clients, for my legacy, for my team, and everything else to carry forward on that. And there's so many great people out there now helping lawyers see this identity crisis, helping lawyers focus on, man, it could be really exciting to move into retirement or to exit out of your firm and do something different, right? And carry that forward. The key reframe is define the difference between a good exit means you get paid something. A successful exit means the clients, the staff, the culture, and the value, and most importantly, probably, is your legacy continue. And we always talk about, law firm transactions. There's two key components. There's fit and there's financials. A good exit means you get the financials. A great exit means you get the fit and the financials. So once you accept that your personal legacy and your firm's legacy, right, matters, the next question becomes, how do you actually protect it? Like, what do you do? The solution, right, can take shape in what legacy really means. It's really about preserving your brand through transition. So I use the analogy of the baton pass versus throwing the keys because that's really it. It's a transition over time, right? The baton pass usually goes faster, but overall it's turning your legacy from abstract fear into practical strategy. Like, I built this legacy. Now I have to choose, right, the right fit to carry on this legacy, right? A firm, a lawyer, the next buyer and next generation. And I am going to be there to transition, to introduce, to pass the baton in so many different ways and things that I've built up onto them so that it can carry forward, not stop, but that it can continue and it can grow. Legacy is how your clients are treated after you leave. Whether your team thrives, whether the firm still operates with your values. And then really focus on looking at practical legacy tools like brand continuation strategies, right? Name retention. Will it be forever when you go to sell a firm that they'll retain your name, or will there be some kind of transition, right? They'll kind of merge it over time, anything else. I mean, a perfect example is if I'm Smith law firm and I bring on somebody else, am I going to be Smith and Jones? Or are we going to be Smith and Associates? Or is it going to be Smith and Jones? And then over time, it's going to be SJ Law, right? Or is it going to be rebranded to something else over time? And so all those things there's ways to preserve the brand and kind of know how it works. There can be gradual brand evolution. It doesn't have to be drastic. There's also cultural, like how decisions are going to be made as part of this transition, how clients are going to be cared for and serviced. There's going to be leadership overlap, how you've done things to compare to how the buyer has done things, and really to carry those forward in a way to make sure that you can help them, right? Let me show you how we can preserve it and carry it forward, right? And then really it's looking at, these are some tools, again, to preserve that legacy. Client communication is number one, probably. You're so concerned about like, what will my clients think? What will my referral? What will the community think? Well, when clients hear it from you in an exciting tone, not last minute, not 6 months after you've already merged with another firm or found a buyer or anything else, but early in the process, and they're usually excited for you. And then you're delivering the message, not some email blanket thing from another party. You're delivering that message. And so the confidence that you have in that buyer, in that successor matter greatly, right? And say, how do we retain all of those clients? Well, you retain it by active communication, by having a solid legacy, firm value transition plan to make sure that you don't just close the deal and then start telling referral sources by blast email and anything else. It means so much more where you call up and say, I want to tell you that I am so excited to share. I have joined this firm, or I have partnered with, or I have found the greatest successor. And as you share that story, and you really are excited because the financials are there, but also the fit. And you have this transition plan, because a lot of times they're going to ask, well, what are you going to do? And like, I'm still going to be here, but I'm transitioning over time. I am going to slow down. I would love to introduce you to the, some of the new team members. Plus, our great team members and everything else are still here and here to serve you. And so now that you've done that, the retention for clients and everything else, what we've always seen is high. You're going to see at least 95% client retention or more. Usually when the buyer comes in, you're going to see growth through that. You're also calling these referral sources, communicating with some you haven't communicated with in a while, and they're going to send work. They're re-energized as well. Now that we've talked about protecting legacy emotionally and culturally, let's talk about structures that make it possible. Like, how do you sell a law firm? How do you exit a law firm? Well, there's full sale. Full sale can be to an outside marketplace buyer, a law firm, an investor, another lawyer. It could be an asset purchase, an equity purchase, right? Some other type of structure. But really you're saying, I am completely divesting myself of ownership and kind of carry forward from there, right? That's a full sale. They're buying usually the name, they're buying the goodwill value, they're buying, receivables, they're buying anything that was your firm. They're kind of buying and taking over so that they can continue doing the great things. The name of the firm is probably not going to change, right? In a lot of these instances, it's just this legal entity structure. Then there's partial sale. Partial sale probably makes the most sense when you have an internal, maybe a younger attorney that's coming up and they're going to be a junior partner, and then you're going to work together and kind of do a step tier. We see that external as well, but there's this partial sale of equity. We're also seeing partial sale of equity in large scale firms in the private market with investment partners, right? Where that can come into place through an Arizona non-attorney ownership structure or an MSO, kind of like bringing in strategic partners. There's merger. And I would also put of counsel under merger. So if you're a lawyer running a firm, overall, you can, of course, merge with a firm. And for a lot of people, are like, well, I want to exit. I want to sell. I don't want to merge. I want to exit. I want to sell. I don't want to be of counsel. But those are just transactional structures to still sell or exit or complete your succession plan. So if I run a law firm that's a niche focus, I may have a hard time finding another buyer in the market that does that. But there's other firms that are good firms, and I could merge with them, structure a financial deal so that I could help bring over, my clients, referrals, community, team, everything that comes with it, transition those over, and I will still get bought out or paid financially for that. And they will start to take over the management, right? The different structure, the client care, everything else. Same thing in of counsel, right? I'm a smaller practitioner, maybe in a niche area, I can really carry that forward, transition, join a firm as of counsel, still get paid financially for the value that I built in that of counsel situation. Works great for smaller practices that can join another law firm, structure something, everything else. And then there's pure internal succession, right? To next partners, anything else. And there's everything in between. I can tell you of years of doing this, lawyers are creative as hell. So there's a box that we always try to say fit in this, and then there's going to be structures and creative strategies that lawyers are going to bring. So there's really no right answer to this structural question. It really comes down to what is your practice and what makes the most sense for you as a seller and potentially as the buyer. And then there's valuation fundamentals when we talk about structures. You actually have to know what buyers are paying for. They're paying for the transferable value, right? A market value of what you've been earning in this firm, right? The revenues, the profits, otherwise packaged together. What is transferable? Some work isn't always transferable. Like I always give the example of we had years ago an attorney who did a lot of expert witness work because of their credentials they had above and beyond an attorney. Well, that work wasn't going to continue once they retired. That would be a loss of value that you'd have to plan for. So they're playing for transferable value, right? The more that you've built up that they could see is going to transfer to them, that's what they're willing to pay for. And then systems, right? They're willing to pay for systems that you built. That also can be people on those systems, right? It could be your trained staff, your team. It could be software. It could be checklist. It could be how you handle clients, how you care for them, right? The best trial notebooks, the best checklist for consultations, whatever it would be, right? Could be data, operations, the financial systems, your marketing systems. All of these are things that you've created that have value. They also are things that if you have systems, hopefully they're not reliant on you, the owner, because that's really what buyers want to pay for is they want to pay for, a firm that has systems that revolves not around the owner, but around the operations of the business, right? So the more you can kind of delegate to systems as an owner, the better off you'll be. And then the third piece of what buyers are looking for is really brand or uniqueness. And really what that comes down to is, what have you built that is hard for somebody else to replicate easily? And so if you've been a 40-year practitioner in an area and you wrote a treatise, right, on how to do things in your state under this practice area, and every, attorney in the community, plus, right, you're just looked at as the foremost authority and clients love you. You have a great website that brings in all this other stuff. That's brand. It's hard to replicate, right? If the firm can't function without you, by the way, it doesn't transfer well. So the biggest thing I tell everybody, it's a book called The Traction Concept, but overall it's delegate to elevate, delegate to people, delegate to systems. So if you sit down and you've got your yellow legal pad and you're going through and writing all that stuff down of what you do on a daily basis, right? How you would account for your time as part of that and everything else, but how it really plays in deal structures and legacy. How do deal structures really work within legacy? Well, the first thing you have to understand is in law firms in the market, earnouts or performance payment structures is a key part of it. Because if you have built a personal legacy, meaning your personal brand, like that workers' comp attorney I used as an example, if they built this personal brand of referrals, community ties, expertise, a buyer is concerned about will that transition? Is that transferable or is it not? And you may say yes, you may say no as the owner of that personal brand and legacy. But the answer really is develop a solid transition plan between seller and buyer, and then invest in it and see it through to make sure it works. But there's always some risk perceived from buyer, right? And of that, that's where performance payment or earnouts come into play. And the simplest explanation I can give to earnouts is it's a percentage of revenues after the firm has been sold, right? So if you think your firm's worth $1 million and the buyer thinks your firm's worth 500, or you think your firm's worth 100 million and the buyer thinks it's worth 70 million. The concept's the same, but the overall aspect of where you really close the gap is, okay, well, let's agree where we agree, like buyer's floor, right? And we can get to fixed payment terms on that of how that'll be paid and everything else. And then the rest, the spread, the gap, right, will be in some kind of performance. So buyer sees risk and they see some loss in that transferable value. You don't perceive it maybe. But if it happens, right, meaning revenues are retained or revenues grow or anything else, then you still will get paid because you're tied to a percentage of the revenues maybe that comes in, or maybe you're tied to a percentage of equity from the firm still going forward or whatever that may be. But most deals always have a performance or an earnout piece or some kind of assumed seller commitment to the deal post closing, right? So clean exits, all cash at closing, sure. And we'll get there with law firms, but overall, where the marketplace is now, not so much. Consulting and transition agreements are really where it's at, right? We talked about fit, but often the bridge between money and meaning is these transition plans. As we go into really like strategy for a successful exit, like we've talked about structures, we've talked about emotions, we've talked about these, but really going into strategy, it's really looking at the ideal timeline, looking at how you build transferable value, maybe your exit readiness. Like, hey, what do I do next? If I'm listening to this, anything else, I'm a law firm owner, what do I want to do next? Let's talk about empowerment, clarity, and action. Empowerment a lot of times comes from education, right? I want you as a law firm owner to be educated enough to take those next steps with confidence, with excitement, with motivation to do that. And so when we start, it's always a question, what's the ideal timeline? If I'm looking to sell, what's the ideal timeline? Well, it's pretty easy to say if you've got a great firm, you're in good health, you're got a marketable firm, everything else, 2 to 3 years out, right, is probably the minimum timeline. And that surprises people a lot. Wait a minute. You mean I have to plan 2 to 3 years out from when I want to be like done practicing law or exited, like no more responsibility? And yeah, and sometimes it's more because again, it takes time to get your firm ready. It takes time to find the right buyer, the right fit, not just the right financials, but the right fit. And then you have to close the deal and create that right transition plan. And your firm may be such that it requires a little bit more. On average, I would say transition plan is somewhere between 12 to 24 months post sale. Not usually full time, it's part time to make sure you can do the role. Some stay on for 5 years or indefinitely, right? But the overall is give yourself time. I tell everybody time is either an asset or a liability in law firm sales and just planning for exit. If you give yourself plenty of time, you can always say no. You can always say no. But if you don't give yourself enough time, you're going to have to accept, right, whatever comes your way. And so late planning just gives you fewer options. More time gives you leverage. So timing is the first part. Give yourself time, plan early, plan early. The next is really building transferable value, not just building value in your firm or maximizing profit, but really building transferable value. What I would look at is a couple key points. Reduce founder dependency, meaning if you're the law firm owner and you sit in the seat and you still do payroll, you still do lease review, you're still the technology and software guy to fix the printer or lady to fix the printer, you still do a little bit of everything, the marketing, right, the management and the client care. You have to reduce that. You have to delegate to elevate. You have to create things where you pass that on to your team or to systems to carry that forward. Institutionalize relationships. How do you make the relationships not just a you to client or you to referral source, right? Or that you're the marketing behind the firm, but that the firm really has the client relationship. And sometimes that's just introducing to more team members, right? Having the client not just know you, but to know the other team members, maybe other attorneys, paralegals, others that are there. If you have not documented your systems and you don't know your systems, and this can be financial, could be marketing, could be operational, right? Client service, anything in between. But I would tell you financials probably first. If you don't have your financial data and accuracy and everything else ready, that's a huge thing to focus on to get your house in order, because buyers will back away from deals where the seller is uncertain of what they have. The seller can't pull certain data, so they never track it. And I tell people it could be as simple as buyers asking questions of sellers, and this has happened. Where do your clients come from? And the seller says, that's a really good question. I've been at this 40. I don't know that I've ever really sat down and looked. I mean, there's, been in this community organization. I do this conference every year. We've got the website that we pay somebody to do, and I've never really tracked those leads. They just keep coming in. I mean, as you can see, they keep coming in. And that has not been our problem. We have not looked for work. And to a seller, they're like, hey, confidence. It's just going to keep coming in. To a buyer, they're like, well, man, what do I need to focus on to preserve so I don't screw it up, right? And how much confidence, if I'm a buyer, that those things are going to transition over to me when I buy the firm and otherwise. So document those systems. Start documenting today if you haven't been, right? Start building simple systems. They don't have to be complex. But if you do have complex systems, you run large firms, which we have firms at scale. It's really looking at making sure you can, know your data. Sit in that seat to know your data and be that true leader to carry that forward. And then overall, the next piece of building transferable value is really develop that next leadership bench. Everybody's like, well, wait, if I develop these attorneys and I'm not going to sell my firm to these attorneys, a lot of those attorneys don't want to be your owners. They want to be managers, right? They want to be potentially non-equity partners. They want to have different titles, different roles, different responsibilities. Or you have paralegals, non-attorneys within the firm that you can promote to, kind of office manager to COO, right? You can recruit if you're a large firm, which is great to see from some of our larger scale firms as they bring in outside, truly business knowledgening leadership. And so develop that next bench, because at a certain point, even though you're going to strengthen your firm while you're there, you're also strengthening the transferable value of the firm. A buyer sees this deeper leadership bench and gets excited by it. The other thing, if you're in plan stage, is get your advisory team together early and include them throughout the process. Look, the Law Practice Exchange runs as a advisory firm from start to finish, but we don't do everything. You're going to need a transactional attorney. You're going to need your CPA involved. You're going to need other things to kind of lean on to make sure that you can go through this successfully. Not just get it done, but get it done with competence. So we love having, your advisory bench come to those early planning strategies, especially, whether it's a smaller firm or it's a significantly, your 500,000 in revenue firm compared to your 50 million in revenue firm. It's the same concept. And then just a couple things that I would hit on just to mention as red flags. If you're in this plan stage, right, you're sitting at your desk, you're in the car listening to the podcast or anything else, these are some red flags. I'll figure it out later. Yeah, I want to do this, but I'll do it later. I don't have time to do it right now. I've got to, go prep for that deposition. I got to go meet that client. I got to draft that estate plan. I've got, so many of these real estate closings. I've got to run, the firm leadership, retreat. I've got to do this, right? There's all the other things that are going to get in the way. But overall, you're just losing time and you're losing options. And you're going to find yourself in that same seat, in that same position, next year, 5 years, to say, oh man, I really need to figure this out. But do I have time now? The challenge is make the time now. Take that first step. Another red flag, just to avoid no valuation. If you don't understand the value of your firm, you should not start in any sale or succession. How could you start really to make sure it's a win for you, a win for the buyer, and that it's truly an achievable deal? I tell everybody valuation and deal structuring is stress testing any good idea for sale. I mean, a lot of sale ideas, succession sound great. As an example, we had one come in where the sole owner had passed on to their long-term associates and they'd already done their agreement, but the value on it, they had used something like 3 times gross revenue for a value. Well, law firms just don't transact for 3 times your top line revenue. And they had signed off. And overall, it's a situation where that would have been catastrophic if it hadn't been caught. So the overall goal is to know your value, know what you built, because then you can really time things of, is that enough? Am I ready to go now to market? Is it more or less? Know what your deal terms are. If you don't have a timeline, it's another big red flag in the planning stage. Know what your timeline is. The other piece, you don't have any successor identified. If you're sitting in the seat, like the story we started with, or I started with today, and you don't know what your plan is, then now is the time to plan, right? I mean, truly, I tell everybody that it's not 1 to 2 to 3 years out from kind of finding this, but now's the time. You don't have a succession plan. You at least need a succession plan to kind of carry that forward. So overall, it's know what your options are, know how to get there and go from that. That's the whole point of this first launch of this podcast, is to get a little bit deeper, right? To share, hopefully on an evergreen basis, some of these concepts and legacy preservation and the emotional impact and those struggles and roadblocks are real. And so you will not lose those in a sale if you do the right things. And so if you're sitting here listening to this podcast, if you're a law firm owner and you're looking for what are my next steps, 5 to 10 years out, if you're in that stage, start with evaluation. Know what your valuation is and start to develop your strategy, your plan. If you're 2 to 3 years out, like, you really want to make sure you are fully focused on building transferable value. Like, you're ready to transition, right? You're ready to take those next steps and find the buyer and everything else. Like, your house is in order, you've delegated, you have your data, you're ready to go. And if you're in this now stage, then get help. Take that first step, right? Take that energy, take that excitement, take that first step. Because the biggest mistake that lawyers can really make is waiting too long to plan their exit.